Blessings, everyone. Thank you for joining me, and it's a real honor to get to speak with Father John Strickland once again. I've spoken with Father before, and what I'll do in the video description for this podcast is I'll put our previous discussion, the link in that video description. And in part, let's call this part two. But in part one, I went over Father's I've got them right here on my bookshelf. I went over Father's first two volumes of his books right here. And now we've got second two versions, Father. Is there thicker?
It grew as I wrote.
So, volume one was The Age of Paradise, Father. That was Christendom from Pentecost to the first millennium. Volume two, this is just a refresher to everybody. Christendom from the Great Schism to the Protestant Reformation. So, Father and I have talked about those two volumes. Now, volume three is Christendom from the Renaissance to the Russian Revolution. And volume four is The Age of Nihilism, Christendom from the Great War to the Culture Wars. I have to say, Father, these two volumes, I mean, were challenging for me intellectually, but I think I did well. These two volumes were much more difficult for me because they're much more philosophical. You get
Mhm.
more into the philosophical movements of the ages than I think you did in the previous two volumes. So
I think people have commented sometimes in talking about the works, uh, uh, classifying them as church history, and they
yeah,
are. Certainly, those first
yeah,
two volumes are interested primarily in the history of the church because that's
yeah,
just what's going on for the first
yeah,
1500 years of
yeah.
Christendom. But the more recent volumes, the third and the fourth volume are cultural history, intellectual history, and so yeah, sometimes there's a different kind of feel for it there.
Yeah, and not that they weren't readable, but it was um this stretched my intellectual capacity more because I have a background in history and art history. So
Mhm.
there was a lot in those two volumes that felt familiar to me where I have really no background in philosophical history or theology or anything, really very, very, very little. So it was more difficult. But I think for the layman, it's doable because I was able to do it. One of the first things that let's just jump right in. One of the first things that interested me in the beginning of volume three was you talked about this dualism in Western thought and culture. Am I right? And it you traced it back to Augustine with this sort of connection or conviction that the world and the spiritual are two separate entities or realities, right, Father?
Mhm. Well, yes. I mean, and
Did
first of all, I want to
did I get that
confess
right?
to you and to your audience, I am not a philosopher, and so
Well,
I'm only
you did a good job pretending.
I'm I'm not very educated in philosophy. But yeah, Augustine, died in the early 400s.
Yeah,
Augustine was a very important, a really profoundly important, seminal Western writer, theologian primarily, but he had experience in philosophy and history and things like this. And he was influenced, I mean, everyone agrees, he was influenced very much by Platonism or Neoplatonism, and as compared to, say, Aristotelianism, which were
right,
the two kind of poles in the ancient world that a
right.
lot of early Christians were kind of relating to, at least in a limited way. And so Augustine can be kind of already connected to the Platonic tendency to see worldly reality and heavenly or eternal reality as being, really quite opposed to each other, the spirit and the body, for instance, the soul and the body. Well, Augustine was thoroughly Christian, so he wasn't just, repeating what Plato, a pagan, had said, but he did emphasize, especially in his later writings, and most famously in his great magnum opus, The City of God. He did emphasize the stark contrast between what he called the city of man, which is like mostly the visible world right here that we
Right.
have in this
Right.
world, and the city of God, which he says is eternal
Right.
and occupies really a heavenly existence.
Right.
He made a big contrast, and that contrast is called dualism.
Right.
And dualism did play a role when Platonism was revived in the Renaissance, which is how I open The Age of Utopia, Volume 3.
Right. And Augustine and the concept of dualism had much more influence and an impact on the West than in the East. Right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's to put it lightly. Yeah. I mean, he had no impact. We can say this. He had zero impact on the East
Okay.
up until the ninth century, is I believe the first time anyone makes reference in the East to Augustine. That's the ninth century, the 800s.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's hundreds of years of formation of Western theological tradition, having no impact on the East, where, of course, there was a tremendously rich and much broader tradition of theological formation in the Greek
Right.
fathers, the Cappadocian fathers, Maximus the Confessor, people like this, John of Damascus. And there you have a very different concept of what the human being is. This is called anthropology, technically speaking. And Augustinian anthropology was centered upon, and this became really influential throughout the history of the West. It's what the volume three is kind of picking up on this as its starting point. The anthropology of Augustine and the Augustinian heritage in the West was very pessimistic. It looked on man as being, almost irreparably broken. Calvin later will call this total depravity, unable to will the good, unable to will his salvation, needing what's called a prevenient will to get him kind of in motion to desire his salvation. And Augustine, is often pointed to by Orthodox Christians coming from that Eastern heritage of the Greek fathers. He's pointed to as being preoccupied with the guilt of the human race that originates with original sin, that every human being is guilty of Adam and Eve's sin, and that this somehow taints the entire human race in such a complete way that it's very pessimistic.
Yes.
Whereas in the East, that original guilt was not and is not, it's not in the Orthodox Church part of our anthropology. We do believe in a broken human race. Everyone is
Hmm.
is is born into a sinful
Yes.
condition, but we're not guilty, and we don't have this kind of really negative view of the human condition, which
Right.
Augustine did.
Yep. This is where I tried to thread all of these thoughts into sort of a complete structure. Is it when you start talking about talked about this pessimism, and when you see, and I kind of relate that to sort of the Catholic sort of preoccupation with guilt, and you also talked about I know we talked about this term, we mentioned discussed this term last time, but I still have a difficult, you know, pronouncing it. This the Stavocentric piety
Hmm.
in Catholicism, which is this cross-centered um, um, train of thought that became even more intensified when they began to emphasize purgatory.
Hmm.
And you talk about this in the book with with the sort of the proliferation of images and carvings and sculptures in the West of the Last Judgment.
Hmm.
And I thought that was interesting because you don't see this as much in the East. And I mean, one of the things iconographically. Did I say that right? Iconograph. How do you say that,
I,
Father?
iconographically, I think.
Iconographically. Thank
Yeah.
you. The difference in the Eastern churches and Western was it was less, cross-centric. There's much
Hmm.
more an emphasis on, I would say, the life of Christ and the resurrection.
Hmm.
And so that was one of the things that that struck me in the very beginning when I started going to Orthodox
Yeah.
churches, and I think I think that goes back to Augustine as well. And I wanted to show some slides. I love slides, so I'm going to share my screen. And I love sort of learning history. I think you do a good job of that in your books. There's a lot of illustrations, which I love, Father. Thank you.
Mm.
And you also have some color illustrations. So this is oh dear. I got to do my art history. This is Aton Cathedral. So this is the Last Judgment. It's like a fun religion here. So this is the complete the and you see these sort of tympanums. I think that's how you pronounce them. So when you go into well, this was Romanesque, but when you go into a Gothic cathedral as well, there's sort of a main portal or entrance that
Hmm.
the, the faithful would proceed under. The clerics not so much. They have their own sort of. But so you would walk under this massive sculpture of the Last Judgment with Christ, and then it's the damned and the saved being separated, and they're often also, sort of gruesome with these demons. Here's angels and demons putting souls on scales. Some are screaming and screeching, and
Hmm.
here's a close up photo. So could you imagine being a peasant
Hmm.
in medieval times and seeing this? And it's these are people without television or books, really. You know, so this is art that's quite influential on upon their psyche.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's absolutely correct, that there was a growing sense of dread in the
Yes.
Christianity of the West after the Great Schism,
Yep.
after the loss of contact with the East, which had a comparatively more optimistic and positive, affirmative approach to the human condition in this world, one that in Volume 1 I call paradise or a paradisiacal culture. This is not paradise. This is the opposite. And and what happens is in my take anyway, my narrative, my story that I tell is that after the Great Division or Great Schism, which is formally 1054 but was broader than that, there's a loss of contact with that comparatively more optimistic or affirmative view of anthropology, which we just reviewed, contrasting Augustine with the Greek
Hmm.
fathers like
Hmm.
Maximus the Confessor.
Hmm.
And as a result, after a few centuries, you start to see this kind of thing. This kind of thing shows a Christianity of terror.
Yep.
And it's so interesting, as you pointed out, Joseph. This is the first thing you see after you approach the cathedral from afar. Let's say, it's two spires as often pointing upward away from this world, suggesting that heaven is far away from this world, rather than the Orthodox central dome, which emphasizes heaven has come to this world. You approach the westwork or the western part of the church to enter the church, and seeing those spires pointing away from this world, then you see what's going on in this last judgment. It's the first encounter you have. And granted, while there's a lot of attention to the resurrection, the ascension of Christ,
Hmm.
things like this, the incarnation of God, it is Christianity for sure. Pardon me, nevertheless, there's comparatively less attention to the affirmative elements of Christianity, the resurrection, as you said, the transformation of this world by the standards of the kingdom of heaven or paradise, and more attention to the suffering and misery that awaits one and characterizes this world.
Yeah. I have not seen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen demons like these in Eastern iconography or people being tortured like that. I don't see it or anything like this. This is quite
Yeah,
horrible.
that's a good one there. Yeah,
These
that's an excellent choice of
these
images.
yeah, these hands coming down,
Yikes.
pulling. And then you have this woman here with these snakes biting her breasts.
hmm
I mean,
hmm
it's
Yeah,
off.
cobras, yeah.
It's off. I'm
And the guy
quite
on the left there is screaming. Uh-huh.
it's sort of like a deflate. I'm not sure what's going on there. It's been 35 years since I studied this stuff, so
Well, let me say, Joseph, there's another thing that starts to happen in the West after the Great Schism, and that is the expansion, just the hypertrophy of clerical supremacy. Of course, taking its cue from papal supremacy, something that's now asserted in the Roman Catholic Church. Uh, Under the Pope are all the clergy, the bishops and the priests and so forth, and they are now more and more set apart from the people. That this tendency can happen anywhere in Christianity, and it can happen and does happen in the East as well, but never like this because at the very moment the Great Schism happens, there is a new and overwhelming push to demand that every member of the clergy be celibate and unmarried, which by necessity separates the entire priesthood and from the people that they minister in the local parish. And so you get a tremendous tendency toward the division between laity and clergy, a kind of clericalism that takes place. And I think this kind of image we're looking at here can be understood in the context of that, you might call it socio-ecclesiastical development, where the people are no longer considered to be following a high standard of spiritual life requiring celibacy, but because they're married, because they're involved in worldly affairs, unlike the clergy are supposed to be, they are subject then to this overwhelming emphasis upon the danger of being a sinner, the danger of being in a world that has not thoroughly renounced something like marriage and sexual activity
yeah,
within marriage.
yeah. And Father, just to share a little bit, what this artwork says to me at this point in my life, I guess it's meant different things, but as someone who was Roman Catholic and then converted to Orthodoxy, is that what I often heard from Catholics, albeit ones that I don't know well, it's typically people online, but uh, things like, don't abandon Jesus because of Judas. There's no salvation outside the Catholic Church. All of this stuff, the bride of Christ is on, all these slogans that I think were meant to instill fear in people. I cannot leave the church. And what I see from this image is it's an image of fear is what I see it is. This is what will happen to you if. So I think old habits die hard. And I
Yeah,
th- I think I think the Catholic Church still employs these tactics today, especially for people that are contemplating leaving, is that you cannot leave. Even
yeah,
if you're going even if you're
that's
going
my
to or
sense.
even
Yeah.
if you're going to Orthodoxy.
Yeah, that's my sense. I mean, we Orthodox, of course, have a very clear and distinct teaching of ecclesiology, about the importance of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church to which we belong. But I think there's less emphasis upon fear and threats and that kind of thing. Uh-huh. And
Yeah,
again, you brought up purgatory earlier. That too is a doctrine that only becomes
yeah,
dogmatic after the Great Schism, and it is a promise that almost everyone will be punished before they reach paradise or heaven. Between this world and eternity, there will be a process of agonizing suffering, punishment and suffering. And during the Middle Ages, this was rendered very much like what you're looking at here. I mean, if you read the Purgatory of St. Patrick, which is a famous early expression of purgatory, I think I want to say like 1100s, maybe 1200s. It is harrowing. I mean, the experience is he's basically in hell, and that's what's going to happen to most people for a while until they're completely purged of all of their sins.
Mm,
So that is a uniquely Western Roman Catholic doctrine that never was accepted in the early church,
mm-mm,
certainly in the East and
mm-mm,
in the Orthodox Church today.
mm-mm. Uh, Same Aton Cathedral, same one. Quite harrowing. This is I went to this it's a beautiful cathedral, the Church of Saint Foy in Conques, I think you pronounce it French. After I had studied all of in when I was at Berkeley in the art history, I was oddly attracted to um, Byzantine iconography, which is strange, but there was nobody interested in that at Berkeley. But there were a few professors that were into Romanesque, so that was the next best thing. So I did
Hmm.
get into Romanesque art, and after that, I went to France and got to look at these things, and I was really fascinated with these images of gore and death and damnation, people being shoved into the sort of furnace of hell represented by this serpent,
Hmm.
um, a devil, the devil, I guess. Look at
There's one interesting exception, if I may,
look at this,
that I'm
Father. Yeah.
aware of. Well, there's a widely reproduced or kind of elaborated
Yep.
icon from 16th century Russia. So that's before Westernization starts. So we can't really blame it on the influence of
I
the
know,
West,
I
the
know
Last
you're,
Judgment.
I know what you're talking about. I've seen it. Yes.
Yeah, that doesn't get a whole lot of circulation, but on the Sunday of the Last Judgment, a Sunday that precedes Great Lent every year for Orthodox, it often appears, on the analogion at church for people to venerate. The other exception, I think, that exists is the commonly reproduced image of Christ's descent into Hades,
Yes.
often called the resurrection icon because it shows him lifting Adam and
I
Eve
love it.
from the tombs.
I love it. I love that.
That's a beautiful one, and
Yes.
it often features at the very bottom of the icon in the black darkness that represents hell or Hades. It shows a figure that's naked and has his hands tied behind his back, kind of hog-tied, and that's always interpreted as being the devil,
Yep.
that Christ has defeated the devil and immobilized him, as it were, made him powerless by kicking down the gates of Hades, raising Adam and Eve, and with Adam and Eve, the whole human race from
Yep.
the dead in his glorious resurrection. He has defeated the power of the devil. And so that's such a different kind of image of
Yep.
the demonic than what we're looking at here. That one emphasizes God's defeat rather than the ominous, power and threat, harrowing potential that we see here.
Yep. That's just another image of that. I think this is Judas here,
Mm. Yeah, hanged
but
himself. Yeah, I see that
yeah,
news. Yeah.
yeah, but still, this sort of goblin or whatever pulling someone's tongue out. It's quite grotesque.
Hmm.
So again, this is the tympanum or the
It's very
portal.
graphic. What you're showing
Yeah.
us here is extremely graphic, and that's another distinctive between East and West after the Great Schism is the emphasis upon suffering in hell. I mean, the Orthodox certainly have a doctrine of eternal suffering in hell, but it's not a material hellfire. It's not your tongue gets pulled out or pitchforks get, buried in your abdomen or something like that.
Yeah.
It's not represented that way.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you mentioned Adam and Eve. In Western art, if you see Adam and Eve at all, it's not represented a lot, but you see it with the fall, with the temptation, or the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. That's what you see typically depicted. But like what you said, you have those beautiful icons of Adam and Eve being pulled out of the tombs, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
quite beautiful. You mentioned this in the book too, which I liked a
Hmm.
lot, was the dance of death.
Yeah,
So
this is really
it
interesting.
yeah, so it's that obsession in the West, which you don't see in the East, with sort of the corporeal um putrefied flesh and death, which you don't see in the East. It's sort of again this dualism or dichotomy, which is
Hmm.
and it I think it also had to do with the reality of the Black Plague. And
Hmm.
and I think for a large part of the population, the church was a bit of a failure during that time. And I think part and parcel of that is that sort of that crisis of faith that I think was partly due to the Black Death, sort of later set up the Reformation,
Hmm.
where I think that hold of fear a bit was lessened on the population, but here you see it trying to be certainly emphasized again.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's very physical. You see their hair that's mostly fallen off their skulls is still clinging, and there's entrails coming out of the one on the right.
Yeah, here's another
Uh,
one, Father. Well,
yeah.
that's a little bit of a different image, but again, it's that uh
It's also interesting the dance of death begins to
ugh,
appear on inside of churches, which is
yeah.
unthinkable in the first
Yes.
millennium. There you
Yes,
go.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a good one there.
yeah,
Yeah, inside of churches it starts to appear, and in some cases it's disoriented. It's facing the procession is toward the west rather than toward the east, which is where the altar is, and symbolically where our attention is as Christians during the liturgy.
yeah. Yeah, I think whenever there's this emphasis on um sort of ghoul and the grotesque in cultures, I think it's a bad sign. And I mean I think we've seen it in in late you saw it in late 20th century America with this obsession with like the slasher film and Freddy
Mm.
and
Hmm.
Jason and
Hmm.
all
Yeah,
and all
interesting. Yeah.
yeah and all of those things. I think it's always a bad sign.
Yeah.
Now here, this is where
Okay.
yeah, I was
To
really
change the subject now.
yeah, I was really fascinated by your take on this. Humanism in art, I guess you could call it, which you see very much in the West, and it encroaches a bit in the East, but nowhere like it does in Catholicism. So this is Raphael, the Sistine Madonna, and it's a beautiful woman, but I don't find it particularly spiritually uplifting.
It's not liturgical. It's not liturgical. It's not
Yeah,
worship centered.
yeah. You end up like, and you mentioned these the putti or the angels in your book. You kind of end up like these guys here, just kind of going, "Oh, okay," you
Yeah,
know.
contrast that with, I mean, you don't have to go back, but just think about those images of the invisible realm, especially the demons, and their activity in destroying people and such. Um, Angels, of course, were seen and biblically are protectors of people against those demonic forces. There's a famous icon in the East. It originates in the first millennium called the Ladder of Divine Ascent, which shows monks ascending a ladder toward heaven through living a life of virtue, and demons pulling them off the ladder into hell. Those who
Yeah.
failed to live out the Christian life. Um, you really get a sense of the importance of angels as protectors of the human race on earth in this
Hmm.
world
Hmm.
against sin and the punishment, the consequences of sin. Look at this painting, the Sistine Madonna, and those two absolutely worthless and bored little angel thingies at the bottom. They are completely powerless. They're completely demoted in the register of the iconography here to the very bottom register, and they're completely meaningless in a
Hmm.
world now reacting against all that negativity, that pessimism that we just reviewed, and all that statuary from
Yeah.
Romanesque and Gothic church buildings. Now there's a reaction. Humanism arises in the Renaissance as a reaction against this anthropological pessimism.
Yeah.
As part of that, it totally diminishes the heavenly. Heaven has no place in this world, as it were, in the kind of the most in the fulfillment of humanism, secular humanism. This world by itself, without interference from heavenly powers, many of which are very scary and dreadful, as we just saw, this world now operates on its own terms as
Yeah.
a seculum. And
Yeah.
so the angels just get demoted to an absolutely meaningless position here.
Yeah. I think there's like a progression or regression too from like this death-centered culture or death obsessed to this sort of where it next kind of like folds into decadence. And I think you see it here. Also, what's interesting too is I have another slide is these curtains I
Mm,
find interesting
mm,
because it's sort of a theatrical sort of presentation
mm,
with these curtains. I don't know.
mm,
I find them very odd and
mhm.
where they're being open. So it's sort of it's it I don't know. I don't know if you have anything to say, but it it strikes me as being very, very staged.
Yeah, I mean, of course, Michelangelo's The Last Supper is a famous and the most famous
Yeah.
expression of this being drawn into an illusion, being drawn
Yeah.
into a three-dimensional space that makes you feel like you're being drawn into this
Yeah.
kind of this world. Um,
Yeah.
my observation, I don't know how many more Renaissance Madonnas you're planning to show us here, but if
Here's another one,
oh,
Father.
there we go. Okay, great.
You mentioned this one in the book as well.
Yeah. So if I may, I was going to say it about the other, but this is an even better example of it.
Okay.
Here, so what iconography was in the first millennium, East and West, was liturgical art. That is to say, it was art designed to serve the liturgy, the liturgical act, the sacramental experience of the heavenly transformation of this world. So liturgical art, of course, deals with this world in the case of iconography, of images of people, for instance, in this world. And so the goal is to show the transformation back to the contrast between cross and transformation in the piety, the transformation, the heavenly transformation of people, people's lives, of this world, of this cosmos, through the presence of the church because of the incarnation and God became human and part of this world. And the church lives out the incarnation. And so the things of this world become sanctified, transformed by heaven. What the Renaissance does with its humanist reaction against the very uncharacteristic, by first millennium standards, unparadisiacal culture of, say, Roman Catholicism, the High Middle Ages, what the Renaissance does is it just nullifies the heavenly transformation of this world and focuses just on the secular transformation of this world, the world for its own sake. And so what you see now is an art that is no longer liturgical. It's an art for its own sake.
Yep.
And so you get that here. Like, look at the Virgin Mary. You don't even know you're looking at the Virgin Mary. An icon
No.
would
No.
have her name up there somehow. You don't even know you're looking at her. You only know
Very
because
little
a little
halo.
tiny hint of a halo literally disappearing from the canvas as we speak. And her hair is now shown. It's so pretty
Yeah.
and it's bun or whatever that's called, and it's kind of golden or reddish. And her neckline is really low. Her skin is fresh and
Beautiful.
delightful to look at. She's got a smile. She's fascinated with this little baby in her arms. The baby, of course, we know is supposed to be Jesus, but
Right.
how do you depict the ruler, the creator of the world and the judge of all creation? In a naked as a naked little baby. You don't. What they're doing here is they're saying, forget about the liturgical veneration of Christ as the God man, and let's just enjoy Christ as a little cute little baby, a kind of Pillsbury Doughboy that you want to poke in the
Yeah.
belly and watch him giggle. And he
Yeah.
himself is just fascinated with those pinks, which
Yeah.
is the name of the flower he's looking at,
Right.
and hence the name for the icon.
Yeah. So my argument is this, let's kind of see where this decadent um fascination goes. So this is Lippi's Madonna. The first time actually as an art history student that I saw this image was just this, because sometimes you see it cropped. And
Uh,
I just thought it was a beautiful woman.
yeah,
And
exactly.
then
Yeah.
yeah, like kind of like the Mona Lisa. And but then later I saw the rest of it and it's like, oh, it is a religious image. It's again, it's kind of oddly framed with this illusionary sort of portal here.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
again,
Hmm.
it's very theatrical and very staged. But I would categorize this as decadent art. So people would
And
agree.
it's headed toward a naturalism from which it will never recover
Yeah.
until the modernists, I recount this in the age of nihilism, overthrow naturalism altogether and just embrace, yeah, you just said nihilism, decadence, just a kind of
Yeah.
uh, a complete rejection of this
Mm.
humanist ideal of the world for its own sake.
She's a beautiful, beautiful woman. Now it goes to with this is very decadent. This is mannerism. So this is real quick. This is the period, roughly after Michelangelo, the High Renaissance. And this is Parmigiano's The Madonna of the Long Neck, which even as an art history student, when I saw it, it disturbed me. I thought it was very odd with the very sensual um, figure, and then, excuse me, the erect nipples, and this very languishing Christ child. It's just this image still disturbs me to this day. Very strange.
Well, it's certainly not liturgical. This is not an image you can pray in front of. Even more so the other one, but this naked baby with genitalia visible is not a Christ that one would pray in front of
No,
in an icon corner at one's home or at a church. It's a elimination of liturgical art.
it's decadent. And then this is what I think it all leads to. Here we go in the West. That's Madonna.
Oh, that is Madonna. I was wondering, yeah, because from
Yep.
one Madonna to another, yeah. Yeah, and in a certain sense, as appalling as she is as a person, forgive me, but that's my opinion. She at least does bring attention to a tendency that starts with the Renaissance.
But I think she's the logical outcome of this, and I think that the East. I've always kind of been interested why the East never had a Madonna or Russia never had a Madonna because it never really had art like this. But
Well,
the West,
what the
but
East has, what
the West
original
did.
what iconography has is, the Virgin Mary, often
Yeah.
pointing. She who points the way is the name of the classic, most common icon of Virgin Mary, pointing the way toward Christ in her arms. She's covered in a veil,
Yeah.
and he's glorified in his clothing is golden and bright and shimmering.
Yeah.
Hers is very dark, and you look at her, like the icon gets you to look at the human being, you're a fellow
Right.
human being with her, and her gesture with her hand
Yeah.
gets you to look at him, as if to say,
Yeah.
"Don't look at me, look at him.
Yeah.
My ministry was to bring him into this world," and so there's a liturgical element to iconography that totally breaks down when the pretty young woman known
Yeah.
as a Madonna just becomes an end in herself. And,
Yeah.
and by the way, I don't know if you're going to get into this, but I was fascinated by and tried to build very directly into my narrative in the Age of Utopia, the transition from what I call from the Virgin Mary to Venus, which is
Yes.
the transition by the 17th, 18th centuries.
I do remember that.
Yeah, now it's Venus, the pagan god of sexual desire and
Yeah.
love,
Yeah.
eroticism, that displaces the Madonna in
Yeah.
Western painting.
Yeah. One last thing about the singer Madonna that I was interested. Is it when her, I'm showing my age, Father, but when her video Like a Prayer came out, which was very saturated with traditional Catholic imagery. I was at UC Berkeley. I was in college at that time. So I was studying a lot of this art, and people that was very shocking when that video came out, and she had a big endorsement deal with Pepsi, and they had quickly canceled it. And it was interesting to me because I was like, well, Madonna is much smarter than people think because she's clearly aware of sort of this odd erotic imagery in religious art. in the West, and I think she's playing with it. And I
Mm.
was so people were shocked. And I'm going to show you again where Catholics were shocked by the reality of their own art historical past. Um, so this is where in the book you were. I like how you compared and contrasted the image of creation and man with God, how it was portrayed in the West as opposed to the East. And here's Michelangelo's famous Sistine ceiling. I have to say, I looked at the Sistine um, chapel in terms of images and books and on slides and things for
Hmm.
years. But when I actually went to the Vatican and saw it, I was kind of struck. I was like, this is a lot of nudity, a
Hmm.
lot of naked bodies, specifically male. It was a bit much for me. It really was. It's very strange. And I think it's peculiar to Catholicism because I always would wonder now, like, would this imagery be, I don't want to say permitted, but would it be painted in an Orthodox setting? It's kind of like
No,
yeah, it's
I've never
not,
seen anything like this in any Orthodox church or
no.
any recognizable Orthodox icon. No, I mean again, this is the collapse of liturgical art in reaction to that
Yeah, yeah,
negativity, that
yeah.
anthropological pessimism of the Middle Ages. This is the collapse within the Roman Catholic Church of the Renaissance of liturgical art.
I think it's also just the decadent reality of the church and the Vatican. I like how you compared it to this one. I got to say I'm fascinated by this is Monreal in Sicily. My dad was born probably 30 miles from this
Oh,
cathedral.
really? Wow.
Yeah, so when I went to I was still Roman Catholic at the time. So when I went to Sicily, I'd studied a lot of the Shafaloo and the cathedral there and the Palatina Palace. And so I wanted to see these mosaics. And when I saw them,
You know, it's interesting, Joseph.
I was struck. I love it. I love it.
After the Norman conquest of Sicily, they erected this church. The Normans, they're very much in the service of the Roman Catholic Church, obedient to the Pope and so forth. They erected this church, but to decorate the church, to paint it with icons, they hired Byzantine or Eastern Orthodox mosaics and iconographers, and it looks very much like it came straight out of
Yeah.
the East.
And Sicily is a bit of a backwater, still is. So it survived, whereas, stuff in Constantinople did not. And a lot of stuff there's still a lot of stuff in Greece that survived. But it's interesting that, yeah, in Sicily, you find a lot of Byzantine mosaics that are very well preserved.
Hmm.
So,
Well, so the point here that I think
yeah.
you were maybe alluding to is how interesting in the anthropology here that man is the image of God.
Mhm.
You see God creating Adam there. That's an image of course, Christ on the left, and that line, I guess, represents the act of creation, and the face of Adam there is more or less identical to the face of Christ. I just really love how Montreal does that.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. I agree. Let me get to this one. I was hoping it's not in your book, but I was hoping we could talk about it a little bit. So this is at Monreale too. This is the creation, I think, of the stars and the heavens. I love how it looks very surrealistic. It looks kind of like modern,
Hmm.
and it doesn't look medieval. The way they've sort of it's sort of they've re, there's sort of this reduction of imagery to sort of this sphere and these multiple spheres. It's very it looks very technological. It's
Hmm.
cool. I love it.
Hmm. Yeah, oh, there's another very naturalistic. Where's this from?
This is from the Sistine Chapel too.
Okay.
I kind of want to talk about decadent or problematic art in Catholicism.
Well, let me
The
just, if I could just insert one thing, because we
Go
kind of
ahead,
left it
go ahead,
behind
Father.
there, but
Go
I
ahead.
did want to say something about this. I do in the book, Age of Utopia. We saw the creation of Adam there.
Yeah,
That's so famous,
yeah.
with God. Who is it? God the Father, God the Logos, who's the Son of God, not God. Yeah. So you see God the Father here on the right. I mean, it seems like God the Father because he got a gray beard. That's not an image of Jesus Christ.
No.
And so you see this kind of image of God the Father now touching Adam to make him. Well, first of all, that's not biblical Christianity. It's God the Logos, the Son of God,
Yeah.
through whom everything is created, according to John's Gospel, chapter 1. And where do we come up with a image of God the Father at all? We don't. It's actually uncanonical to paint images of God the Father because he's never revealed himself. Only his son, Jesus Christ, took humanity. And that was built right into the Eastern theory of iconology that you can only paint Christ as a man. You can't paint him as like even a lamb, which becomes a Western thing, because he is the only one who became human. So you don't paint God the Father as a man because he never became human. And furthermore, what is the kind of archetype or prototype for God the Father like this? Well, it's Zeus. And so I don't think
Hmm.
you probably came up with it for our slideshow here, but you can see ancient pagan
Hmm.
statues of Zeus that look pretty much like this barrel-chested,
Hmm.
powerfully armed, weightlifter kind of god, Zeus, heaving a spear to show his power with a scraggly beard and kind of the old man look that he has there. And that's what Michelangelo seems to have done. Renaissance, after all, was a rebirth of pagan
Hmm.
art and culture. And so he's simply painted Zeus and called him God, God the Father, for a Christian use.
Hmm. I agree. So this is one of the nude images on the Sistine Chapel. They don't really serve a purpose. They sort of frame the scenes,
Mm.
but again, in the context of a Christian church, I find this troublesome. And again, I couldn't imagine this being one of the things that struck me about Orthodox churches is there's really nothing superfluous. Everything has a purpose.
Mm.
Everything has meaning. And you see
Not
that in
decorative.
yeah, and you see that in icons too. It's kind of like, well, why is this tree here? Or why is this here? Why is this rock here? Well, it all has a meaning. It's not just decorative. And you see that in Orthodox churches. Everything has a purpose, everything has a meaning. There's really not a decorative, maybe there's a frame around an icon or something, but it's not, or a border or something, a vine sort of motif or something. But they don't have anything like this. They don't have nude images.
Well, again, if the Renaissance was a rebirth of pagan culture and art, I mean, there was a great celebration of the nude body in classical Greece and classical Rome, and maybe the painters, or in this case, were Michelangelo was just okay. That's our new standard, our new prototype to work with, and so we'll paint images of beautifully formed human bodies, just to, as it were, decorate and strengthen the composition we're doing.
Yeah, that's another one.
Hmm.
Then it goes to this sort of liturgical art. No, I shouldn't say liturgical art because like you were saying, it's not this sort of religious art.
Yeah.
This is Saint Sebastian.
Mm.
So now we're in, let's say, the Baroque period.
I hear you're contemplating something, right, Joseph? You're not praying to Saint Sebastian in this posture. You're
No.
contemplating his coming martyrdom, and how beautiful his body is in a naturalistic kind of way, like the light and the shadows. Of course, liturgical art is interested in heaven, and heaven doesn't have shadows, right? And it's a sign of naturalism, secularism, that you suddenly have all sorts of attention to realistic, naturalistic shadowing, and the muscles are accentuated this way. His dramatic posture in that kind of pose there creates sympathy.
Yeah.
It inspires contemplation, but it's not prayer. It's not liturgical transformation of this world. It's contemplation, the individual contemplating.
Why is it that you have this homoerotic religious art in the West, but not in the East?
I think once it becomes naturalistic and wouldn't be just homoerotic, I think it'd be heteroerotic to use that term
Yeah,
as well. When you have, you have someone maybe, looking at a naked female, like again, some of those even Madonnas. I mean, going
yeah,
back to Leapy, you mentioned Leapy, you showed
yeah,
us a Leapy Madonna.
yeah.
You didn't mention, and it's interesting. Even Vasari, a contemporary a biographer of Lippi, noted that Lippi was crawling, going off to the streets of Florence
Yeah.
and to brothels at night, in between painting Madonnas. Raphael, who did the Sistine Madonna you showed us there,
Hmm.
and the Madonna of the Pinks, is known to have been seducing his models that he brought
Yeah,
into his studio
yeah,
to sit as the Virgin Mary for him. So there's an eroticism even in the
yeah.
artwork itself that's going on in the artist. How different that is than the classical iconographer who's usually a tonsured monk taking a vow of celibacy, fasting, praying, confessing his sins, receiving Holy Communion as part of his artwork. Now it's
Mm,
the artist is just this freewheeling genius who goes from town to town and stirs up his imagination by transgressing, moral boundaries.
hmm. So this is the Vatican Nativity. Every year, the Vatican at St. Peter's Square, they put on display a sort of life-size, three-dimensional nativity. So a few years ago, they had this one, which is sort of in a neo-Rococo, I don't know what you call it, style, Florin, Neapolitan style. But again, traditional Catholics were shocked by the inclusion of this nude figure. I don't know what it was supposed to represent. A poor,
At first, I thought we were looking at an actual naked man lying there.
yeah,
The
a
skin tone is so realistic,
yeah,
naturalistic.
it's disturbing. A poor within a religious context. So a poor, I don't know what it represented. A poor man being offered a cloth
Mm,
by this figure here, and people were shocked by the inclusion. But then I thought, your church has a history of doing this stuff.
mhm,
So I don't know I don't know where the outrage came from, except from ignorance. But Catholicism has a long history of freely playing with religious imagery and sexuality and eroticism and homoeroticism, which is disturbing and strange and very telling, I think. I think you mentioned forced clerical celibacy a bit ago. I think this has to do with that. I think it has to do with sexual repression. It's very odd in Catholicism that you have this obsession with sexual imagery in religious art, and I think it has to do with that
mm.
directly. So,
I think that is, it is profoundly influential that, Peter Damian in the early 11th century, and he lived through the Great Schism and
yep,
was a big advocate for papal supremacy and the papal Reformation at that time. I detail all this in The Age of Division, the
yep,
second volume. Peter Damian wrote a book called In Praise of Flagellation,
yep,
where he was the driving force for the celibacy of absolutely every cleric in the West. And once that celibacy was imposed, sexuality itself became, a great stain. I mean, he wrote books about how could the priest possibly be handling the Eucharistic gifts if he's also handling, a wife at home.
yeah,
And so sexuality became this kind of absolutely negative thing. Whereas in the East, you still do have married priests. The majority of priests in the East, in the Orthodox Church, that is, we're in the West as well, so we're not Eastern, we're Orthodox, but um, they are mostly married, and so there's not this kind of stigma placed
mm,
on sexuality. And without that stigma, maybe that, I mean, maybe that's
yeah,
why this became such a thing in the West. I don't know. I wouldn't be able
yeah.
to, speculate too much about
I agree, and I think the certain type of men that are going to be involved or attracted to the sort of this repressive culture that it's a dichotomy because, you know, where there's forced celibacy, but then they surround themselves with this erotic liturgical art. So it's very strange. So there's an inner struggle there that is taking place. When I read this quote from your book, it reminded me of this painting. The quote from your book is in the Roman Catholic Church, scholasticism had established an epistemological barrier between heaven and earth by asserting that only an intermediary created grace enables man to know an otherwise totally transcendent God even more sharply. Okay, that's so. I think in Catholicism there's that strong emphasis on intermediary, and you need the Pope.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I mean, you have to have the Pope. It's a necessity. He is the vicar of Christ.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I
A
think,
title which, by the way, is introduced after the Great Schism. Yeah.
yeah, and I think this is reflected in this really interesting painting. It's of Pope Pius the Eighth. It's by it wasn't a well-known artist, Horace Venet, 1829. So you see, talk about Caesaropapism. So you see the Pope on this litter, I guess they would call it, being carried on a throne with these fans. These are very remind you of like what a Byzantine emperor with these ostrich fans. And kind of interesting over here, you have an Eastern, looks like an Eastern
The
bishop with,
mitre on. Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah. So it's very strange. It's like the procession of Eastern potentate. You have everybody, you have these Franciscans with their
Mm-hmm.
cowls and bishops and a knight and wow. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and his scowl, the Pope is scowling down and on everyone in a threatening way, yeah. Or
look at this one.
majestic.
Yeah, look at this one, Father. So this is
Oh
Pope
wow.
Leo the 13th. Um, I can't recall. He wasn't a well-known artist. He's sort of a Rococo or Baroque artist. So this, I recognize this. This is at the Vatican. It's the throne of Peter. You actually see it. I can't remember exactly where it is at St. Peter's. It's sort of to the right or something when you walk in. But it's Bernini did it. It's this massive window
Mm.
with and then there's the throne of Peter. And I'm like, wow, look at this.
Very Baroque. Yeah, very Baroque.
Very, very weird. I wanted to talk about this a little bit too, Father. I think we did a little bit the last time. This is the Eisenheim altarpiece.
hmm Yeah.
So
Well,
here,
this is that anthropological pessimism, at
yeah,
its greatest.
yep,
This is the ghastly effects of human sin, original sin, being kind of, laid on Christ, who dies a miserable death, all his pain and suffering and wounds and like the you can even see those thorns like sticking
yes,
in his arm there,
yes,
like you just feel the pain. Now, Christ died on a cross. That was a painful death. All the Gospels are in agreement that he died a um a death on the cross in the painful way that brought about. But it's not a bloodbath. It's not a Mel Gibson like account of the blood and suffering and screams and agony and visual horror. That's not what the Gospels present to us. And iconography, following the Gospels, following biblical Christianity, had never emphasized so strongly anything even approaching this, the ghastly pain that Christ endured on the cross until after the Great Schism, this anthropological pessimism kind of was unleashed on the Western Roman Catholic Church through an effort to stir up piety, and devotion in people to focus on
Yep.
their sins and their guilt in causing
Yep.
this to happen as
Yep.
individuals. And
Oh,
that's now,
yeah.
it's again, it's not liturgical. It's
No.
designed to stir up devotion and contemplation rather than prayer.
Yeah. With your permission, Father, I wanted to read this real quick
Yeah.
because I've had you an hour already. This is from the fourth volume. For hundreds of years, Roman Catholicism and Protestantism were the only Christian options known to Western thinkers. The old Christendom of the first millennium was forgotten, and the new Christendom that evolved from the Great Division was separated from Eastern Christendom. This tendency towards Occidental oblivion began at the ninth century court of Charlemagne, and then, after the Great Schism of 1054, became entrenched in papal supremacy and scholasticism. One of the most important outcomes was the loss of contact with orthodoxy's comparatively affirmative anthropological and cosmological vision. In the early church, man was called to participate in the kingdom of heaven while in this world and through sacraments and worship, he transformed it accordingly. This produced a paradisiacal culture. But after the Great Division, that culture began to wane as the transformational imperative was redirected from heavenly to reformational ends, such as the clericalization of society and the codification of repentance. As the doctrine of purgatory took hold, anthropological pessimism and cosmological contempt began to erode the experience of heaven, the human condition in the world, accordingly, according to authorities like Pope Innocent III and Martin Luther, was increasingly characterized as one of misery. I think that's reflected here.
Yeah, this is a key moment in that transition after the Great Division.
Yeah, I would argue that this is it's essentially a pornographic image, and because I think it's an unnecessary reveling and almost taking pleasure in torture,
Hmm.
and I think you'll see why. This is Picasso's crucifixion. It's really an image that I really dislike intensely, but it's also for this image here of Christ. It's sort of like a demonic.
Yeah, I mean that would be
Um,
purely demonic. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't think I think these are connected, these two,
Hmm.
because
I think, but they're connected. I think they're connected. You're right, Joseph, but they're connected through something else, and that through something else is the naturalism of the Renaissance and its collapse. It was always a
Mhm.
counterfeit for traditional Christianity.
Yeah.
Naturalism was and humanism was. When it collapses by the end of the 19th century, Picasso was one of the earliest to come forward and say, "Hey, that's all that naturalism is a counterfeit." And since he had no faith, Picasso's life story is really kind of a depressing one from a Christian point of
Hmm.
view, not kind of, but extremely. He wound up with nothing, and that
Yeah.
nihilism,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's where he winds up there. So
Th
is
th
that from Gibson, Mel
that's
Gibson?
Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ too, which I do believe is a pornographic image too. I it's a strange sort of taking pleasure in someone's uh torture. I don't, yeah, I don't know. I think it becomes like this image. It becomes a bit of a farce, I hate to say. And it leads towards this. Francis receives Andre Serrano, whose art includes crucifix submerged in urine.
Yeah.
You had these weird, I included these two because I think again in Catholicism, even where I mean earlier we had it with the Madonna and the saints. I think even in terms of Christ, you have this odd sort of inclusion of sexuality.
That's Bernini, that's a really, I talk about that in the Age of Utopia. That really is a strikingly um, naturalistic and sensual and even you might say erotic image on her face there. It's often
Yeah.
commented that way too.
Yeah. I think too with you go back to that Raphael with the curtains opening because I did see this in Rome. It's kind of it's at an odd church. Um there was kind of nobody there. You had to go and see it and I wanted to see this sculpture group and it's in the setting and it's very theatrical the way
Yeah.
it's situated. You had sort of light coming down and these rays and it sort of is I don't know. It's like the Picasso. It just reads me as very false. I have to we're going to wind down, Father, because there's a bunch of stuff I want to talk to you about. You mentioned in your book about Allen Ginsberg and the the sort of the counterculture in San Francisco of the 1960s. I thought that was really interesting because you know who else was there at that same time was Father Seraphim Rose.
Yeah, that's right.
This same place, same time. And I thought it was interesting that in the Catholic Church, you have a priest, James Martin, sort of praising Allen Ginsberg. Uh, um, I don't know for what. This is a quote from Allen Ginsberg. I'm a member of NAMBLA because I love boys too. So I think I think all of this stuff is interconnected. I'm sorry. This sexuality, weird art, uh, priest talking great about Allen Ginsberg and who he was. And here we are. I know I've kept you for an hour, Father. Do you have time for just a couple other things?
You bet. Sure. Yeah.
Oh, great. Oh, great. Oh, great. This is kind of, um, I wanted to just touch a couple of topics in this book that I found interesting. So in let me see where let me find I marked it. Here we go. You had an interesting observation here. It is only through transgressive acts that man escapes the boredom that modern bourgeois life inflicts on him. I thought that was really interesting because I was always fascinated with the idea of boredom because it's, you know, in medieval studies, people weren't bored. You know, people's lives were very regulated, you know, pre-industrial
Hmm.
Europe. It was work. You got up, life was often occupied with sustenance. Um, if you were a man, you were working the land. This is opposed to people that were in castles. That was a very small minority. But if you were a typical person, you were working the land, you were raising your family. If you were a woman, you were doing similar things. But people were not bored. That's kind of like a weird concept, boredom. And I remember when I was at Berkeley, one of my professors, I was talking to him about how I was interested in the idea of boredom because it comes in a bit with the Impressionists which were I was interested in too. So the Impressionists in France were quite bourgeois painters,
Hmm.
um, looking mainly at bourgeois life and middle class life in Paris. And it was often what I saw in their paintings, especially in Paris in the streets, were sort of these people with very vacant expressions and walking around and in parks, looking quite bored. Even if you look at the island the Grand Jatte by Seurat, you know, these people, you know, on the riverside, the riverbank, looking very bored. Um, he suggested that I read Madame Bovary's, the Gustave Flaubert's Madame Bovary, which
Hmm.
which I love that book. And it was about a convent raised girl who marries this middle class doctor and sort of separated from the necessity for everyday needs, she gets bored, you know,
Hmm.
and she starts to read, you know, romance novels and things that were new. And so I was interested in that boredom. I was kind of like, I wanted you to talk about that a little bit. It is only through transgressive acts that man escapes the boredom that modern bourgeois life inflicts on him.
What
Could you
was that from? I
could
can't remember what chapter I was in there.
sorry to whack you, Father. So this is chapter 3,
Okay. Yeah.
um, dehumanization.
hmm Yeah. Yeah, right. Okay. Well, dehumanization. Uh-huh. I mean, that for me was a kind of bringing to completion the first three chapters, which represent
Yeah.
part one of the book, The Specter of Nihilism, which tried to explore, beginning really with Nietzsche, although there's a kind of a prelude with the work of Richard Wagner, a great romantic and kind of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
post-romantic composer, looking at a society that no longer could find its way with humanism as it had been defined by the Renaissance, which we've spent
Mm-hmm.
most of our time talking about.
Mm-hmm.
People like Nietzsche, but before him, Wagner too taught this to Nietzsche, were contemptuous of the status quo, their middle class environment that they lived within. Their art, not Wagner's art, was designed to serve that class, an increasingly industrialized, urbanized Western
Yeah.
Europe, with excess wealth to be able to spend on tickets to the opera at night, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they had contempt for it because they recognize that it's really can't sustain itself. It's not an end in itself. It's really contemptible for them. And so they separated themselves, Wagner did, and then Nietzsche as a philosopher, from their society, looking down on it with contempt. Looking down on it with contempt. I would argue this goes back to the Papal Reformation and a reformational Christianity, which always looked on society as contemptible and
Mm-hmm.
in need of an elite kind of leadership to raise it to higher
Mm-hmm.
standards. So that's
Mm-hmm.
already seen in the
Mm-hmm.
clericalism of the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
But
So
anyway,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I didn't mean to interrupt. But so you talk about these transgressive acts because you don't have like this multiplication of of like sexual identities and this obsession with sort of niche sex fetishes in other cultures. They seem to be exclusive to sort of the West. The sort of boredom that's sort of bred by affluence.
Yeah, yeah, I think I see your point there. It is a striking thing. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about like
No, you
sexual
no, you
deviance in
didn't,
the
but
book.
I know, but I kind of latched onto that because it's
But you
what
can
I'm
see
in.
that, and I do mention it every now and then. Like some of the literature coming out of Western Europe at this time, Baudelaire, for
Hmm.
instance,
Hmm. Hmm.
his what I think I bring attention to this, his
Hmm.
famous Fleur de Mal
Hmm.
collection of poetry was originally going to be called The Lesbians.
Hmm.
I talk about how the patroness of Picasso, whom he painted, Gertrude Stein,
Yep,
had same-sex
I
life
remember that. I
and
remember that.
was advocating the word gay and stuff like this. You start to see this,
Mm.
Portrait of Dorian Gray, author. Everything there's a lot of this starting to happen. The surrealists were really into edgy, and here's the thing, transgression. We're back to
Yep.
transgression. Being transgressive is the way out of this miserable situation that the elite artist, philosopher finds himself or herself in at the turn of the century, the modernist.
Hmm.
And so, sexuality is one way of transgressing, and then you get and by the end of the century, you get to Michel Foucault, who
I'm going to mention
incredible
him.
story works. It just fits right
Yeah.
into the culmination of my narrative at the end of Age of Nihilism.
Yeah. One of the things that it was interesting too in the book was you spent a lot of time on Dostoevsky, who I love. I love the brothers Karamazov is probably one of my favorite books, if not my favorite books. And the famous section with Ivan and who's the brother? Aloysia, Misha?
Alyosha.
Yeah. Um the that famous section, I mean the the quote that oh, I wrote down a quote here. I don't know if it was in the book. Oh, I don't know if you mentioned it in here. I don't think you did. But you'd mentioned the what's that the famous part, the Inquisitor, the
Legend of the Grand Inquisitor.
thank you, Father.
Yeah.
I think this is from this. I think if the devil does not exist and man has therefore created him, he has created him in his own image
Hmm.
and likeness. I thought that was interesting. I thought it also kind of worked into a lot of what we're talking about. And then there's the other quote, if there is no God, then everything is permitted.
Hmm.
I think that's where we're kind of we're going. There's another I'm gonna speed through this. There's another part of this book that I found interesting when you're talking about the Hitler Youth and
Oh.
Nazism.
Hmm.
It's a short section, but it stuck out because it reminded me of sort of the LGBT cult, where it's sort of pulling children away from the
Hmm.
family, giving them a set of sort of dogmas and beliefs. But there's also this weird undercurrent of abuse involved. I thought that was interesting, your your discussion about the Nazi cult and the Hitler Youth.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and the the big festivals, Nazi Party festival
Yes.
at Nuremberg. Yeah,
Yeah.
these young adults would go off, and the girls
Yeah.
would come back pregnant.
There's this weird sexual dynamic to it too that I think you see that's clear in the LGBT cult. And I know you like music, Father, because you have a lot of musical references
Mm,
in the book. And on one page you talked about The Sound of Silence
mm, mm.
by Simon and Garfunkel. And I just wanted to mention that was interesting to me because when I was a Catholic boy in the parochial school system in the 70s, that was one of our liturgical songs that we sang during Mass. Isn't that bizarre? So I
Really?
thought,
Wow.
oh yeah, we sang that. So I thought it was interesting because you discussed what a nihilistic song it is. And I go, here in Catholicism, we're singing that in church by the nuns. You know, these nuns were sort of like Sister Smile, who sang Dominique, you know, after she left the order and became a lesbian, you
Mm,
know. So they were these nuns that we were being taught by. It was so weird. It was so surreal.
mm, mhm,
Yeah. And then I want to talk about Michael Foucault real quick because you talked about him too. Um, I wanted to read you this quote because I think it's a quote from Foucault, and I thought I don't know, it kind of encapsulates everything. The problem is not to discourse on oneself the truth of one's sex, but rather to use se our sexuality henceforth to arrive at a multiplicity of relationships. And no doubt, homosexuality is not a form of desire, but something desirable. Therefore, we have to work at becoming homosexuals. It's so weird.
mhm,
I think that's kind of where the West ended up with just a multiplicity of relationships. I don't think people know who they are, what they are. I think people are so confused at this point.
mhm,
And I guess in this book, in these series of books, I think you trace specifically in the West, and you always do a good job of contrasting what's going on in the West as opposed to what's going on in the East. And I think it's kind of it's a tragic, it's a tragic downfall of the West where you end up with the Michael Foucault.
Yeah, he's one of the last words I have. I
You
mean,
did.
his case is one of the last words I have to say about what happens. Transhumanism, you know, is a is part of that story too.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. What hope is there for the West? I don't know. Is it just a return to their early Christian roots? I don't know. I don't get it. It seems like it's so far gone that and people are so enmeshed in it and and confusion. I don't know. What hope is there?
Well, to talk about the wholesale reconstruction of the West, would be
Sorry,
ambitious to say the
sorry,
least.
sorry, Father.
Yeah, I was just thinking that the wholesale reconstruction of the West would be a project that certainly I can't imagine, coming up with a blueprint for. I do end the whole book series with a general conclusion. I open it in volume one with a general introduction, and I close it in volume four with a general conclusion. And in that conclusion, I try to bring attention to the value of the liturgical heritage we receive from the first millennium. And that if we travel back to that first millennium into the deep past, not the more recent past, which is, say the sexual revolution or the Enlightenment or the Protestant Reformation, but the deep past, we'll find the resources we need to revive at least that part of the West that we live within right now. Whether we can have an impact on its larger superstructure around us or not, I don't know, but we can certainly have some influence. And I think that influence is centered on liturgy, on a
Mm,
sacramental understanding
mm,
of the cosmos, that the
mm,
cosmos is to be transformed by
mm,
paradise, by a heavenly contact
mm,
through the church with heaven. And
mm,
if we pursue that, then we will see a real improvement, if not return.
mm,
And there were plenty of problems in the first millennium. Sometimes people say I trying to characterize the first millennium as a kind of a paradise on earth. It wasn't that. The
mm,
world will never be perfect. Can't be. The kingdom of heaven is not of this world. But I think we can recover a healthy culture, one in which, Michel Foucault is not an inspiration for most of our college professors, as he
yeah,
certainly was when I was going through graduate school in the 90s. And the
yeah,
way to do that, Joseph, I think, is through repentance.
yeah,
Classical Christian first millennium repentance, a joyful sense that through repentance we recover communion with God and the paradise that brings us in
yeah.
this.
Yeah, real quick, one final thing. But before we started to record, you were you told me about the number of converts you're seeing in Orthodoxy.
Mhm.
So I was wondering if not that Orthodoxy is part of of how the West can be, I don't want to say saved, but how the West can be renewed.
Mhm.
Because I mean, certainly Orthodoxy's been growing in Russia, and it looks like in the America it is as well. Because I mean, I know that as someone born and raised Catholic, although gone for most of my life, is that Catholicism was sort of providing a kind of false cosmology for me, where God had created me gay, and I think you're seeing that with these gay blessings in the Catholic Church, where they've sort of officially accepted that because they're blessing gay people. They're not blessing people with same-sex attraction. They're blessing gay couples.
Mhm.
So I think I think Orthodoxy is a bit of an anecdote and has a means to help people sort of get through these all these false teachings. And so I
It could be
hope
it could be argued that that whole thing right now is, just another consequence of a nihilistic culture, one which
uh,
can't stand for a very clear um commitment to Christian anthropology, which is there are only two sexes, not multiple sexes, and the
right.
only legitimate expression of a sexuality is within a marriage between the two sexes, and one that leads toward life and worship and experience of God's love, Ephesians chapter 5. And once that's gone, anything goes. And I'm afraid what's going on now is that many Christian churches, not the Orthodox Church, but many Christian churches are starting to capitulate to that nihilistic tendency out of
Yeah.
an absence of conviction.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that in Orthodoxy, I mean, liturgically, it's remained quite intact, and theologically it has, but also artistically. And I think this hour and a half, I'm sorry, Father, this hour and a half that you spent with me, you can see that the West can't claim that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we certainly see after the Great Division a
Yeah.
sequence of transitions, transformations, changes, and degeneration
Yeah.
in the culture of the West. As wonderful as much of that culture is, as you brought attention to
Yeah.
my love of music, I loved 19th century classical music, listen to it all the time. Would be very sad not to be able to turn on my Beethoven or
Yeah.
Tchaikovsky or Wagner or
Yeah.
whatever.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, but the fact is that that did give that was a bearer of this journey toward nihilism. I think
Yeah.
it was. The Orthodox, I want to say though, the Orthodox, have done a good job, comparatively speaking. But you can find Orthodox icons. This was very common in Russia, beginning in the 18th century and beyond, of icons that are very naturalistic. Just falling under the
Yeah.
influence of Western cultural
Yeah.
superiority kind of thing.
Yeah.
And happily that's being cleaned up,
Yeah.
as we today. But it still is something, but it's not integral to the experience of the Orthodox Church, that
No.
deviation from good iconography.
And there isn't that swerve toward desecration like you have in the West that's been so severe.
Mm-hmm,
You
mm-hmm,
know, I don't know. I don't think it would be permitted. So,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I agree with you.
yeah. Hey, thank you, Father. I
You
appreciate
bet. Yeah,
I,
really nice
app-
to see you again, Joseph, and
it.
talk.
It was, and I encourage everyone to read, start out. So it didn't take me long, a couple of months, and I read through Father's I've some of them I've read through twice, and I think I'm going to go back to these last two volumes and probably read them again. I think I really need to because it's a lot. They're rich, they're awesome, and I have to say, let me end with this. So these books, Father, were recommended to me by a priest at my parish, and when I saw that it was 4 volumes, I was like, oh man. So, but I was a new catechumen and I was like, Father is highly recommending these books to me, so I better read them. And I'm really thankful I did because I learned a lot and I have recommended them to other Orthodox people. But I think you don't have to be Orthodox to read them because I've actually recommended them to my Catholic friends, but they loved them. They really liked these books, my Catholic friends, because I think in terms of their church's own history, there's a lot here that they did not even know. So thank you, Father.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.